I mean, the goal of the company is to put agent improvement on autopilot. A lot of agents are really exciting, but I would say that the experience is very barbelled, right? So you have certain agents that provide these miraculous experiences, and yet a lot of the agents, maybe the same ones, are also producing experiences that are just baffling. I think there are two core bets that we made on the technological front about what kind of product was needed for the industry. The first of which is that we don't believe that humans are going to be the end users of this kind of product. It's going to be agents. The rest of the community at the time, it's crazy, but they were focused on things like latency and cost, which, don't get me wrong, these things all still matter. But when you think about what agent builders are centrally focused on today, it is all of the things that we have spent tirelessly the last year or so building towards. We spend 150% of our time thinking about these questions. And so we literally walk into the offices of our customers. We sit down with them for hours and hours and hours to singularly figure out what are like the 1 to 5 issues that really matter for their agents.
Hi everyone, I'm James Alcorn, and this is the Investment Memo, the show where founders reveal the stories behind their businesses and how they will shape the future of their industries. Today, I'm joined by Alex Shan, CEO and co-founder of Judgment Labs, the company building the improvement layer for AI agents. Alex has what I believe is an exceptional background. He entered Stanford at 16, and for some good time was the only undergraduate in Chris Manning's NLP lab, joining as a freshman. After authoring into top conferences and writing papers with Manning and DeepMind researchers, Alex led early agent development at Juniper Networks, where he built and shipped agentic products to enterprise customers. And now he's tackling one of the hardest unsolved problems in enterprise AI. How do you ensure your AI agents are accurate, reliable, and improve with every interaction? Today, we'll talk about why AI quality assurance is the next critical infrastructure layer, how Judgment Labs is solving the evaluation and experimentation problem that teams deploying AI agents face, and what it takes to build a research-grade platform that works at production scale. Alex, welcome to the show.
It's great to be here, James.
So you haven't seen this before, but this is our investment memo on Judgment Labs.
Thank you.
Both the seed and Series A, and I'm excited to hand that over to you. I think for the viewers, let's start with just an overview of, what is Judgment Labs and what is the problem you're solving?
Thanks, James. This is a lot of fun. Judgment is the platform for improving agents from production data. So there's a lot of different problems that are going on with agents today. A lot of agents are really exciting, but I would say that the experience is very barbelled, right? So you have certain agents that provide these miraculous experiences, and yet a lot of the agents, maybe the same ones, are also producing experiences that are just baffling. And so because of this barbell, there's a lot of questions around the reliability and accuracy over these agents. We aim to solve that. The other one is that, we sort of think of these vertical AI agent companies as hoping that they improve with every single interaction. And today, I think a lot of that process improving the agents is very manual, or we just rely on the model labs. And so we hope to also give agency to those companies who want to improve their own agents from their own unique production data.
Alex, what does it mean to be a full lifecycle agent behavior monitoring platform?
I think that being full lifecycle means that you sort of take this approach to where I think a lot of agentic products are heading, which is proactive. So where the platform sits today is that, we're an incredibly effective tool for you to track what your agents are doing, to have infrastructure that exposes all of that data to agents to come over so that at the grasp of whenever a user wants to do it, they can figure out where are my agents failing, where are users unhappy, how do we group that and track that systematically and have me get alerted for the next time that all these things happen, maybe to set up a few experiments. Where proactive sort of agent development steps in is so that users don't even have to do that. I think a lot of teams get stuck at the point where either with a lot of the agent native companies that we work with, they're just moving so fast, unbelievably fast in this agent development lifecycle to where they just simply don't have time to be asking questions like, where are my agents failing? And so being able to surface to them proactively to say, hey, your agents are actually hallucinating 37% of the time on these kinds of queries with your most important customers, almost acting as a sort of agent engineer on your team, an extension of your product team, and sort of pointing out these failure modes. And then maybe even like tying that to coding agents. A lot of the functions that a lot of teams use us for is we have all the context surrounding these issues. So because we can group and sort of point to a group of data that sort of suggests a problem, a set of customers, and the scope of that, you can just spawn Devin, you can spawn Claude, you can spawn a cursor to go and autonomously resolve that. And so adding to this proactive cycle where we are sort of increasingly encroaching to make agent engineers less involved inside of the loop on all the boring stuff allows those agent engineers to focus on really high level product decisions, in effect, to use their better judgment, if you will, to go in and decide what are the big questions to go and solve. And then for all these tiny things like, okay, there's a tool calling issue there, there's an issue with following up questions with customers here, we'll have coding agents go and repair all these broken parts of our harness.
Tell us about your co-founders. How did you guys meet?
Yeah, this one's a fun one. So, I've known Joe and Andrew for a very long time. I met Joe sort of near the end of elementary school, beginning of middle school. He's actually the guy that taught me how to program. So I was the first customer of his Python course when we were
Mm,
kids. And so Joe and I are this classic sort of duo throughout middle school, high school, doing everything from playing tennis together to playing video games, doing homework. And so, Joe and I have become insanely good friends. And I think he's grown to be kind of a brother to me. We would sort of hang out every single day after school. And that trust is really deep to building a company out of. And I've known Andrew for even longer than Joe, actually, and that's because our parents are childhood best friends. So Andrew's mom and my mom grew up in China on a farm together, basically. And so they were rice farmers in China. And so they sort of had this dream of being educated, coming out of the Cultural Revolution. And so they went to middle school, high school, college, and got their PhDs together at the same program in the States. And so that sort of put them in a position to be soul sisters, if you will. So they obviously wanted to have kids around the same time. And so I was de facto Andrew's brother growing up. That was a pretty interesting gig for a while. But Andrew's the guy that got me into research. And so Andrew's dad had been a professor at Stanford for some time, pushed us towards AI as kids, study this when you're young so that when you're older, this will be a really interesting field. And, one of those predictions very early on was that natural language processing, these two things would come together. And so we studied that together. And so by the time that I got into college, I was very fortunate to go to Stanford myself, one of the homes of NLP on the West Coast, and Andrew went to Berkeley, one of the other homes of NLP on the West Coast. We sort of merged together to be interested in all things to do with how do you understand the limitations and capabilities of transformers at the time.
mhm.
This is predating the existence of any LLMs. And so we were really interested in going into the behaviors and understanding the limitations of stuff like Roberta and Electra and all these transformers that existed in the past. And then when these LLM transformers came out, it was really interesting to delve into. And so we gained a really deep appreciation for that. And so, Andrew jumped into startups much earlier than I did. I actually went to the enterprise first before really getting my knees deep into startups. He went to Together AI to be an early research scientist there and sort of developed his love for all things post-training and evals. I developed it in a much more applied sense at Juniper, building all these early versions of agents, but sort of pieced together that these are two people that really love all things to do with LLMs, agents, and evals. We want to make a company out of that. And then at the end, we sort of realized, hey, if we're going to build anything interesting in infrastructure, we need someone that deeply understands how systems work. And so, good thing our sort of third musketeer, Joseph, from elementary and middle and high school, was sort of there to close that loop for us because at the time he was a Datadog, and he was like saying, "This is the canonical monitoring
Mhm.
company, the canonical infrastructure company. If I can come in here and sort of merge our understandings of how to build these systems, this is going to be really great."
Judgment as a company has had a very interesting kind of fundraising journey. Could you speak a little bit to what that experience has been like? We've gotten to know each other, many, many years ago now ahead of the seed, but between the seed and the A as well, there was an interesting period of, when we were working together, I was also simultaneously evaluating, Lightspeed's ambition to kind of lead the next round as well. So maybe you could speak to what that experience has been like.
Yeah, it's funny because we haven't talked about this a lot, but I guess like from my perspective, it starts from the point at which Andrew and I first met you, which was no idea of what we really wanted to do. All we knew was that two best friends want to go and make a company together, something to do with agents, something to do with improving them. And so what was really interesting was that we wanted to find someone that really understood what we were doing. I mean, in many fashions, I think in early stage infrastructure, you want to find partners that deeply understand that these things take a long time to
Yeah.
come to fruition, and also that the end outcome, while perhaps clear, the journey to get there is extremely unclear in between. And so I remember coming to you sort of saying, we want to put agents on improvement on autopilot. And that was a very sort of like weird thesis because at the time in which we first started talking, agents themselves were sort of ill-defined. Also,
Right.
sort of the concept of like when agents would make their way into enterprise workflows was also very obscure. And yet, sort of, you had this similar thesis around like, we believe that agents are, first of all, pretty important, which, when we first started pitching people was sort of unclear as a premise to start with. Secondly, we both agreed that they would come to the enterprise much faster than most people would imagine. And thirdly, is that the premise is that you could put these things on autopilot and you should design a platform that should be used by agents rather than humans as the main interface. And then secondly is that you can put those things on autopilot. And so partnering with you was an interesting experience because you were one of the first people that actually understood what we were doing and also understood that we should be patient with building this thing until we get that product right. And so having that patience to work with us all the way through today where we're launching the company and sort of and beyond was a very interesting and very unique experience to come across as an investor. And then sort of partnering with you from the seed, one of the first things that I remember remember Andrew, Joe, and I coming to you and saying was like, what should the focus be on this company? And very uniquely, again, you were sort of saying, look, let's sort of sit down and think about, what's going to happen to this company in the next decade and plan backwards. And sort of we looked at a bunch of examples of companies from the past, whether it be your Datadogs or your Databricks. And so when you look at these early stage infrastructure companies, what we admired about them together was the fact that those companies came into an era where cloud was not really, definitionally popular nor mainstream into the enterprise. It was also unclear what the cloud really was, and therefore it was also really unclear how you're supposed to build infrastructure to support applications on the cloud. I think very similarly, we observed that early days, no one really knew what agents were. Even today, you have all these things coming around agents, whether it be parallel agents, background agents, agent to agent communication, still very undefined. And so because of that, we have to be extremely open-minded, extremely ears to the ground in terms of getting into the weeds of researchers who would live like a year in the future and figuring out with them what would be happening to agents over the next 9 months. Building a product centered around that instead of building for what existed at the time so that we're always on the front foot. And so that was a really fun experience to sort of hunker down, build the product, get introduced to our first set of design partners. And then sort of at the A, it was a very interesting process because, even though everything is so early, it's very difficult to understand what's going to happen to the entire space. You and the rest of the Lightspeed team sort of had this extremely high conviction to the point where when we were raising the Series A, sort of walked into that investment meeting and sort of, no deck, no memo, just sort of go in there and talk about what we're trying to do here. And then in a matter of minutes, meeting's over, you walk out with me and you're like, all right, just letting you know, we will be leading
Yes.
this round. It was pretty funny.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you left the room, there wasn't a lot of discussion, but there was an immediate consensus that we need to be in business with this company again. So not just leading the seed, but leading the Series A as well. And so I kind of chased you out of the building and didn't let you leave until we had that discussion. But yeah, it was an extraordinary experience on both sides. When you started the business, the zeitgeist in the kind of agentic industry broadly was centered around principles wherein the human was the end user, not the agent, or the horizon of a given set of tasks was perhaps one or two steps. But you guys, as a founding group, took a very differentiated view on some of those questions. Could you speak to that?
Yeah. I think there are two core bets that we made on the technological front about what kind of product was needed for the industry. The first of which is that we don't believe that humans are going to be the end users of this kind of product. It's going to be agents. And secondly, that the types of agents that we wanted to build this infrastructure for and design a platform around were totally not like the ones that existed at the time. The first bet was sort of quite obvious. If you want to make an infrastructure product that puts agent improvement on autopilot, there definitionally should be as little human in the loop as possible. And when we started the company, that thesis was like pretty crazy at the time, which was that, you always need a product engineer, a product manager, or a systems agent engineer in there sort of guiding the agent to where to improve. But if you were to think from like deep learning principles, and, this comes from a long history of studying NLP and deep learning, is that you want as little human bias as possible, right? So when these like recommender systems and even the language models themselves got pre-trained and, all these things sort of came out, their thesis of amongst the research community was like, why would you bias yourself with assuming what humans want these things to do rather than picking up all these implicit signals and letting the machines do the work for you? And so that's why today the product is primarily building infrastructure for agents to improve other agents, for agents to comb over the trajectory data from other agents and sort of figure out how to improve them from there. The other sort of thesis that we had was, what kind of agents do you want to build this product for? Agents at the time was not even really a word when we first came to you. We were still using terminology like tool calling LLMs. And so when you're sort of building for that, we sort of also had to reimagine, what do agents look like today, but looking back at it 16 months ago. And at the time, it was a lot of chatbots, right? It was a lot of, we call the OpenAI API once or something like that to generate a response. And yet we sort of rejected that hypothesis. We assumed that the kind of things that we needed to build infrastructure around was tool calling LLMs that would span hundreds, if not thousands of different, turns with calling different APIs, writing code themselves, being put in a sandbox, and sort of like thinking about building infrastructure for that, which changes everything from how you design a database to how you search over that database. And then, what this product really means in terms of, if we're storing and searching over the database in some way, what are you really storing and searching for? We thought of behaviors at first, whereas I think the rest of the community at the time, it's crazy, but they were focused on things like latency and cost, which, don't get me wrong, these things all still matter. But when you think about what agent builders are centrally focused on today, it is all of the things that we've spent tirelessly the last year or so building towards.
So in our diligence for the Series A, we spoke to a lot of customers and partners of Judgment Labs. And one thing that really stood out was this kind of really deep sense of customer delight and satisfaction around the way in which you're working with them as a vendor, which seems to extend beyond the kind of normal scope of what it means to be a software vendor. Could you speak to that process and that kind of philosophy of partnering with these companies?
Yeah, for sure. It starts with this core thesis that we have around the agent improvement loop and specifically around this idea of how you measure and monitor quality, which is that all of that work to measure and monitor quality and then to then do something with all that information is extremely operational, meaning it takes a lot of tribal knowledge and it usually takes a lot of human work to get done, even despite having a ton of agents that manage the loop end to end. And so those questions might be like, hey, how do I sort of parse through my data to understand what quality means for my agent? A lot of the time, teams that we work with at the point of first meeting them generally know that there's something wrong with their agents, but they couldn't pinpoint it to this level of specificity that you need to properly monitor an agent, such as on these types of queries, our tool calls are failing in this way, which ends up affecting customer experiences in the other way. And the way that we sort of see ourselves is as a partner in agent reliability to every single company that we work with, big or small. We've served all the way from companies at pre-seed stage all the way to, massive enterprises, and they all suffer from the same issue, which is that agent engineers spend their day worrying about a ton of different things. This question around like monitoring the quality of their agents is a big chunk of it, but really it's only a fraction of all the other things that they have to worry about. But we spend 150% of our time thinking about these questions. And so we literally walk into the offices of our customers. We sit down with them for hours and hours and hours to singularly figure out what are like the 1 to 5 issues that really matter for their agents, to distill those into what we call quality rubrics, which really matter when you're using AI systems, which in themselves are non-deterministic measures of quality. So we have to sort of be careful to make sure that, if we're using agents to judge the quality of other agents, that we set that up and calibrate it to be human aligned to what they care about. All of that work is incredibly operationally heavy, but we take it upon ourselves, especially as a company that understands what it means to be a partner to all of our early customers, to work knee deep with them until we get to that point of really analyzing the results. And again, it takes a lot of expertise to understand, okay, if an agent is sort of monitoring another agent, we find this issue. What does that really mean in terms of, does that mean that we have to resolve a core part of the harness? Does that mean that we sort of throw our hands up and say, agents are non-deterministic. Let's wait for OpenAI and Anthropic to drop the new models. We work with our companies to figure out what those sort of decision points are and to sort of progress and to act more so as a partner than just a point solution or a software tool.
From a go-to-market perspective, the company has grown from an early set of design partners to a kind of early commercial set of customers to today, where you have a growing set of kind of customers that are both growing in depth and breadth. I wanted to ask you, how do you think about approaching this initial kind of commercial motion? What are the types of companies that you want to be partnering with in this first kind of customer cohort? And what are the characteristics that make a really good kind of design partner for an agent infrastructure company in 2026?
It's a great question. And I think like largely the answer is close to what we came up with about a year ago when we first decided to start partnering with folks. And it's sort of this question, we alluded to beforehand, this idea that we don't even know what the final version of agents is going to look like. We're still knee deep into the scientific revolution of what agents are going to turn out to be. And so similar to this idea of what happened to the cloud, where, when cloud first came, we had no multi-tenant architectures, these services were not distributed. These were single tenant cloud applications. And so we have this crazy architectures now in terms of, cloud infrastructure. We similarly believe that agent infrastructure also has to massively evolve. And so one of the lessons that we're taking away from the past iteration of companies is to not be so dogmatic as to put our foot down and say that we know exactly what kind of agents people are going to be building, but rather to work with the best possible teams that are going to push us to discover what that means, in an iterative process to sort of live in the future constantly by a set of like 6 to 8 months, which is, by my view, the fastest that you can sort of move today. And the way that we pick early customers to work with is really who's building the deep agents out there in the industry and who's going to, point out flaws in our own product to say, hey, you don't support background agents very well. Hey, you don't support agent to agent evaluations very well, or handoffs and context between agents on different services. These are all the open questions that we aim to solve on a product level. And that starts principally with how we choose the customers. And so we look for companies building deep agents. We also look for companies that build agents that are core to their business. We're not looking for companies today that sort of view agents as this supplemental thing on top of their software product. We look for companies that live and die by the quality of their agents and therefore are going to push us as a vendor the most to improve our infrastructure. Because at the end of the day, we want to be such a core part of their improvement loop that if we're not keeping up with them, they're going to be very unhappy.
As you work to define this new category of agent behavior monitoring, there are many different future paths. There are different kind of versions of the future in terms of what does the end experience for a customer, a user in this category look like in 5 years' time. I wonder, like, which version of that future are you building towards, and what is your expectation around how a user will engage with the Judgment platform in 5 years' time? Like, what does that look like? What does that feel like?
I mean, the goal of the company is to put agent improvement on autopilot, right? In our mind, there is no reason why you can't put the self-improvement loops of these agents simply into the hands of other agents or other AI systems that can then remedy all the issues within those systems. If you think about the classical ML ops and sort of like, improvement loops of the past, whether it be by platforms like the Databrickses or the weights and biases, where we take all the production data off of ad recommender systems or different social network systems and, different algos out there. All these systems are powered by user interaction data, whether it be every like that you leave on a social media post or every comment that you leave on a YouTube video. It all goes into this algo that is self-reinforcing to give you a better outcome as a user. And we fundamentally believe that agents can be the same. It's just that the parameters that we're tweaking are very different. We don't tweak like the batch size or the learning rate as we did in prior iterations of deep learning systems. We are more interested in optimizing all your skills, all the prompts, all the routing that happens, every single model selection, and all of these parameters currently are being chosen using humans, right? Humans are the ones that dictate what the prompts are. We go and edit them, and we just fundamentally believe as long as you have an optimization signal that is grounded in your production data, there's no reason why we can't put that improvement loop on autopilot via agents or other AI systems. And so functionally, what that means for us in the next 5 years is that we imagine a world in which all you have to do is sort of build the first version of your agent. And as soon as you have these mountains of production data that sort of come off of it, and you can tie these to end outcomes by which you want to optimize towards, there's no reason why you just won't have agent improvement on autopilot, to the sense where all your prompts are selected by other agents, all of your harness engineering is done by other agents, all these issues regarding tool calling are remedied by other agents, and sort of, we imagine in a very headless fashion, you just sort of instrument judgment on top of your agents, and then from there, you sort of ideally set what you would like to happen as the end outcome of your agent, and we handle the optimization for you.
Take us 5 years, 10 years out from today. What does Judgment phase two, phase three, phase four look like?
So as a business, we'll probably evolve first to trying to win out the developer community. Centrally, I think focus is extremely important as a founder. For the next set of years, we're going to be centrally focused in winning the developer market. But then secondly, we sort of have this realization that, if you were to think about the broader agent economy, all the people that buy and sell agents and all the nodes that happen in between, today, that vision only sets out to solve the seller's equation of the business. How do you take the people that are developing the agents and help them sell better agents? But in effect, because we will become the de facto layer of what quality and improvement means for all these agents, we can also serve the buyers in many interesting ways. A lot of companies in the enterprise, especially, have sort of come to us, and the question for them is, we have all these agents that we know we're going to spend a lot of money on. We just don't know which one to buy because to us, they all look the same. And principally, we're interested in the ones that have the best quality, whatever that means to us. And so because we are the people in this community that have the most data and the most insight into all the behaviors that, a buyer of agents might want, you look at things like how often does it leak PII? How often does it curse at users? How often does it hallucinate? How many times does it, et cetera, on all these behaviors that buyers care about? We can provide these buyers with really data-driven information to make really good procurement decisions, and also to do that in a continuous fashion, making so that procurement is not a one point in time decision, but rather a continuous thing where buyers and sellers hold each other accountable on the actual behavior of the agents inside of the production setups. And so if you imagine the agent economy as a group of nodes where you have buyers and sellers, we sit on the edges between these, providing an extremely data-driven, meritocratic fashion of how to buy and sell agents between companies in a way where, the sellers of agents understand what the buyers care about. They know how to optimize towards all those goals. And yet the buyers also understand what they care about, and they can have a data-driven way to measure and hold their sellers accountable for all these solutions. And then finally, if you imagine that you have all this data between what buyers care about and what sellers can provide, and all the nitty-gritty of the agents that are going to be facilitating all that economic value in between, as all great businesses end up doing, it falls into insurance, which is sort of this concept of we can underwrite the risk of what agents are doing way better than anybody else. And so as agents make it really deep into enterprise workflows, a lot of enterprises are going to care a lot about understanding, okay, if the agents are functioning in XYZ ways and we have XYZ exposure to risk, how do we underwrite that and sort of provide insurance on top of all these agents to make sure that the true agent economy is both, accurate from the seller side, it's useful from the buyer side, and there's risk management that happens in between.
To that end, how can folks get in touch with you?
We have the classic, go to our landing page, take a demo. People can always reach out to me directly at alex@judgmentlabs.ai. I would say like one of the things very early on when you start a company, so early into this cycle of infrastructure, is that we know what it's like to have no customers, right? Like as a founder, we were always told by like other great founders of the past, you're going to remember what it's like to have zero customers, and it's going to make you absolutely obsessed with everything to do with serving people. And a lot of good partner stuff so sort of echoed that, including you. And so whenever anybody reaches out, I'm very happy to respond very quickly directly to all these emails. You can also reach anyone on our team. And the standard that we hold ourselves to is that if we can't get back to you within less than a day, we have really failed our prospects and future customers.
Alex, congratulations and thank you so much.
Thanks. It was a lot of fun, James. Appreciate it.